Do you know what really happens if you don't have a will? Hi, it's Nancy Boisvert here with a Gappy and Next Steps. Now, I've done a lot of articles and a lot of videos recently about wills, about what's missing from wills, why you need a will, how a will factors into your legacy plan. But I've never actually directly addressed what happens if you don't have a will. As I've reported in other videos and other articles, about 50% of Canadians do not have a current valid will. I get that talking about death is something that people avoid, even though we all know that we are going to die. For some reason, we refuse to accept and acknowledge that reality, and we procrastinate dealing with those issues. The problem with procrastination is really none of us knows when we're going to die, and a will and a legacy plan protects you beyond just dying. If you were in an accident or had a stroke and you suddenly were incapacitated, if you couldn't make any choices or any decisions, if you were no longer in a position to be able to speak for yourself, who would speak for you? If you haven't created your legacy plan, if you don't have your legal documents in order, then people are going to randomly be making decisions on your behalf. Your family, your loved ones will have very little control. And if you haven't expressed your wishes to them, that may not even factor into it because they may not know what you want. So today I wanted to address specifically the issues about what happens if you don't have a will. Now, that is a phrase that is called intestate. You die intestate. A will, just to remind you, is a legal document that outlines how your assets will be distributed, how your minor or dependent children will be cared for, essentially who gets what. Without that document in place, what happens is that the courts in your jurisdiction end up taking over the control of your estate. That means that you have no control, your loved ones have no control, and decisions could be made that would be far from what you would have wanted for your loved ones. So let's start right at what happens when you pass away. You pass away, you don't have a will, and nothing can move forward with your family. There will be no asset distribution. It could leave your loved ones without any kind of financial recourse, any way to pay the bills, and everything will be up in the air as far as dealing with any of your assets because everything is going to be frozen. The courts in your jurisdiction will take things over. They will manage your estate. If they do find somebody or if somebody steps forward to offer to take care of your estate, they will likely be appointed by the court. Now, first of all, this causes delays and it costs cost to the estate, but it could have repercussions beyond that. If the court ends up appointing somebody who didn't have your best interests in mind, who didn't really understand what it was that you wanted, who would not administer your estate in the way that you would have wanted, that is well beyond your control at this point. You cannot control from the grave. And that means that you could have somebody, let's go way out there on a limb. You've got somebody who basically wants your assets. Well, if they're administering your estate, how do you have any control over that? Now, there are also intestacy laws in each jurisdiction, and they protect to some degree what happens if you die intestate. Although there are slight variations in the laws in Canada, depending on your province or territory, the basis of those laws are fairly common. Your spouse will likely get the majority of your estate, and then it will be split among your children. If you don't have a spouse, if you don't have children, then it could go to more distant relatives, including people that maybe you didn't want to receive anything. It could also end up being given entirely to the province. If they can't track anybody down, any living relatives, you may have wanted to give to some beloved charity, or maybe you wanted to leave your estate to somebody who is a very close friend of yours. But if you don't have a will and you don't have any living relatives, then the province could end up with your estate. Another point to consider is our dynamics have changed as a society. We have untraditional marriages, we have stepchildren, we have second, third, fourth marriages, and we have a large number of common law relationships. If you don't have a will, that could mean that your common law spouse ends up with nothing. You know, in my article this week, I mentioned about somebody who passed away without a will. The children got everything, and his common law spouse got nothing, including the house that they had shared for years. I'm sure that you don't want that to happen. Also, stepchildren. Perhaps you have a second or third marriage and you had stepchildren and you raised those children and they were like your own, but they're not legally entitled to anything in most jurisdictions if they're not named in the will. All of these things really impact not just the well-being of your loved ones, the people that you leave behind. It also creates cost, it creates delays, it creates more of a burden on the court systems that are already bogged down. And it can take, depending on your jurisdiction, it can take months, it can take up to a year just to receive a grant of probate. Well, if you're dealing with the courts and you're having to deal with a grant of administration, where the courts will appoint somebody, you could be looking at a couple of years. How does your loved one pay the bills? How do they pay the rent, the mortgage? How do they feed your family? Isn't it worth it to stop and think that it's an uncomfortable thing for me to talk about, but I have to plan. I have to plan for my family. If you'd like a little bit of assistance with that, I do have a legacy package. I can sit with you. I can review what your circumstances are and help guide you on how to best create these documents, what to look for, and how to be prepared. Please stop and think of those that you're going to leave behind. Don't leave them in a bad situation. Hop over to my website, fill out the contact form, and I'll get in touch with you and I can help you move things forward on this journey to protecting your loved ones. Thanks very much for joining me today. I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye for now.